They say amateurs talk tactics while professionals talk logistics. And this old adage has rung true time and time again throughout the history of human warfare, and it will serve as the crux of this conversation today. More and more we hear this talk of national divorce and left versus right civil war. Now, as a professional survival instructor who has provided training to 4 branches of the United States military and multiple law enforcement agencies, here are my top 3 reasons why I'm just not that concerned about the issue. Feel free to call me naive in the comments, but I hope you will hear me out. Reason number 1 is something many of you may not have thought of, and I don't hear talked about much by the influencers who like to discuss this matter, and that's plain old drugs. Around 65% of the United States population is on some type of prescription medication. About 11% is on some type of diabetes medication. Around half of Americans have hypertension, and half of those are on meds for it. I see numbers quoted that between 16 and 25% of us are on some type of psychiatric or mood-altering medication. And this doesn't count all the tough guy and war bro influencers whose supply of HGH and testosterone will quickly run out. And the list goes on and on. These are not medications that you can just stop taking willy-nilly. So what happens when a civil war breaks out and the steady supply of these drugs ceases? Well, that's not very hard to figure out. When people suddenly stop taking medications for stress and anxiety, paralyzing panic attacks and thoughts of self-harm can occur. It could take over a year to safely wean off of these types of drugs. When people stop taking diabetes medication, they can go into diabetic shock and diabetic comas, which of course is going to significantly shorten their lifespan. When blood pressure and blood thinning medications go away, hearts stop. The effects of supply chain disruption in this area would be devastating to a very significant portion of our population. For number 2, let's talk about the old adage of beans, bullets, and band-aids and getting them where they need to go on the battlefield. We're talking critical supply lines for frontline forces here. It takes a lot of bullets to fight a war, many millions in fact, and they are heavy and they must be transported to and from active battlefields. And hey, maybe you're the guy that has a full C train full of ammo. Great, I want to be your friend. How much of that supply do you think you can carry with you? And what do you think is going to happen when you run low in a firefight? That you'll just be able to jog home and get some more real quick? I don't think it's going to work that way. Without an effective system of large-scale distribution and ways to protect those doing so, agitated forces will be forced to lay down their arms very quickly. So how many of you prepper groups have mapped out where ammunition factories are in the United States, and better yet, where they get their raw supplies from? And here's another very important question. Let's talk about the Band-Aids. How do you plan on treating your wounded? Tourniquets and QuikClot are great, but many battlefield injuries are going to eventually need some form of trauma surgery. Will you be able to form field hospitals and staff them and protect them while everything else is going on? How many trauma surgeons do you have in your prepper group? How many do you know? Now look, it's fine if you've never thought of these things before because it's very unlikely that you will ever have to. However, all of these issues will become apparent very quickly to any guerrilla force attempting to operate domestically. For number 3, and this may be the most significant, I have to reference the Gilded Cage. Look, it's a lot more fun to tweet about civil wars and throw some edgy stickers on your car than to be in a constant series of deadly battlefield engagements for weeks to months to years on end. Remember, there are no deployment rotations in a civil war. It's hot until it's not, and it takes place in your neighborhoods. Your children, your parents and grandparents, your family is under threat while all of this is going on. And let's face it, if you are hearing about civil war, it's probably in places like this, on social media or on podcasts. You're not exactly hearing the local home and business owners chat it up at the Green Dragon. That's a bit of a history reference for you revolutionary guys. What you have to understand is that social media companies pay content creators for views. This means so-called influencers will jump on any and every topic that gets them clicks. We know this already. And social media algorithms love hyper-political posts that get people all worked up. For gosh sake, these political influencers were just getting wild over cheap made in third world country jeans. Do you think they care about this topic? This gives some viewers, especially those without an active social life or who spend far too much time online, a skewed view of the reality on the ground. And that reality is this: only 5 to 20% of eligible voters vote in local elections, and that's where they have the most power to make change. The last presidential election had one of the highest turnouts in our history, yet 35% of eligible voters didn't show up. And that means 30% or so voted for the right, 30% or so voted for the left. These aren't the massive movements that the media would like to make them out to be. And my point is this: if people aren't even fired up enough to vote, do you think they're fired up enough to go to war with their next door neighbor because of the signs in their yard or whatever the stupid issue of the day is? As for the military, do you think that the 18 to 24-year-olds that make up the biggest portion of our services are all stoked on going and shooting up the neighborhoods they grew up in? And do you think our now combat experienced leadership will, en masse, give a worship-like obedience to a single individual and turn against everything they know? Personally, I don't think we've crossed that kind of Rubicon of motivation and intent as of yet. So if I don't expect civil war, what do I expect? Because something is happening. Well, here's a term I want you to get familiar with, and that's stochastic terrorism. There are a lot of voices being very loud about this issue on both sides of the aisle. Now, most regular Americans just ignore it. And if you don't think so, go look at your favorite guy's view count on the last video they posted. And then go to like a kid's unboxing channel where they unbox toys and play with Legos. Look at their views and tell me what the public is really interested in. Most Americans just don't care about the wild straw men and partisan talking points that these individuals are feeding you. People with borderline mental illnesses or intellectual disabilities, however, or people experiencing isolation or depression, and this one is important, impotent rage, may be different. They may be developing parasocial relationships with these media con artists. They may be asking more and more, why isn't anyone doing anything, and feeling a stronger and stronger desire to act out. And we've all seen what this means for human life. One more group that falls into this that I'm barely going to touch on. You can look these guys up. These are the so-called accelerationists and dark enlightenment types. If you remember during what they called the BLM riots and all of the George Floyd protests and whatnot, the officer that was shot by a member of the Air Force who viewed himself as an accelerationist. And these people think that, oh, they'll do these deeds that'll speed things up to make everything work out how they see it in their twisted little tiny minds. Now, this has just been my 2 cents, and by no means am I giving you a rosy prognosis. Terrible things have happened in the past, and terrible things will happen in the future. Political violence waged by radicals and the mentally ill seems to be on the rise, and I don't expect it to slow down at this point. That is, however, much, much different than a civil war. Don't let these people fool you. Your neighbor is not your enemy. So, if this video isn't shadow banned or taken down, I'd love to hear your comments on the matter. My name is Thomas Coyne. I'm a professional survival instructor. I hope you like and share.